Hello, everyone. I am Jim Lippman, and it is my privilege to welcome you on behalf of the Board of Directors of Cedars Sinai. Wherever you are today, we are connected by the meaning of Yom HaShoah, the Holocaust Remembrance Day. I am grateful that you are participating in today's observance. If you are a patient watching our program from your hospital room, I want you to know that we are sending you our thoughts and prayers, whatever your race, religion, or orientation may be. Today's message is universal. We have many reasons in our lives to be grateful. I am especially thankful for the doctors, nurses, scientists, and volunteers in our institution who devote themselves to our health and well-being. But we also have reasons to be deeply concerned. Every day, we hear about hatred and racist attacks in our cities, both here in the United States and around the world. It is heartbreaking to know that even 75 years after the Holocaust, we still live in the shadow of anti-Semitism, which is why Yom HaShoah is truly important. People across Los Angeles and the world pause to remember and renew their solemn vow that the Holocaust will never be forgotten or repeated. Today, we mark this somber occasion with special music and a lecture by the esteemed USC professor, Stephen Ross, who will share his unique insights into the historic contributions of the Los Angeles Jewish community during that time period. Thank you again for your presence, and please accept my warmest thanks for joining us today.
In a year which has unfortunately included so much darkness and ongoing reminders of evil and anti-Semitism, I want to share a story of hope and light, even from within the horrors of the Holocaust. The late British rabbi Hugh Gryn recounted this story from when he was a teenage prisoner in Auschwitz. One midwinter evening, one of the inmates reminded us that tonight was the first night of Hanukkah, the Festival of Lights. My father constructed a little Hanukkah menorah out of scrap metal. For a wick, he took some threads from his prison uniform. For oil, he used some butter that he somehow procured from a guard. Although such observances were strictly forbidden, we were used to taking risks. But I protested at the waste of precious calories. Would it not be better to share some butter on a crust of bread than to burn it? Hugo, said my father, both you and I know that a person can live a very long time without food. But Hugo, I tell you, a person cannot live a single day without hope. And they lit the menorah. May we all find sources of hope and light, even in very dark times. Amen.
Greetings, and welcome to our 39th observance of Yom HaShoah. Today has a very deep resonance for the Cedars Sinai family. Recent events in Los Angeles have once again served as a stark reminder of our obligation as individuals and as an organization to do everything in our power to eradicate hate and bigotry from our world. We owe those who survived the Holocaust a profound debt for showing us the power of dignity and resilience in the face of evil. For many decades, Holocaust survivors have made exceptional contributions to our institution, and we are profoundly grateful for their unselfish commitment. They went through hell on earth, but still came out optimistic and generous in order to repair the world. Some of them, or their children and grandchildren, became doctors who devoted themselves to caring for our patients. They became scientists who spent countless hours in our laboratories finding ways to cure or prevent some of the most challenging diseases. Holocaust survivors have been volunteers who unselfishly gave their time and presence across our institution. And Holocaust survivors have been donors whose kindness and generosity helped transform Cedars Sinai into one of the leading hospitals in the nation and in the world. These courageous individuals had so much taken from them, but somehow they found ways to triumph over violence and hatred. We dedicate today's program to those who lost their lives in the Holocaust and to those who survived it and then showed us the way to building a better world. We will never forget. We are forever grateful for the example the survivors have set for us, and we welcome you to today's program.
Hello, my name is Dr. Sarah J. Siegel. I'm the founding director of the Cedars Sinai Center for Medicine, Holocaust, and Genocide Studies, and an assistant professor in the Cedars Sinai program in the history of medicine. The Cedars Sinai Center for Medicine, Holocaust, and Genocide Studies brings together scholars of all disciplines to expand knowledge about the activities of medical professionals before, during, and after the Holocaust, other genocides, and human atrocities. The center presents educational events featuring international experts, and it supports scholars in their pursuit of new findings in the burgeoning field of medicine, Holocaust, and genocide studies. It is an honor to have renowned scholar Stephen J. Ross as the keynote speaker for the 39th annual Cedars Sinai Yom HaShoah program. Dr. Ross is Distinguished Professor of History, Dean's Professor of History, and the Director of the Kazin Institute for the Study of the Jewish Role in American Life at the University of Southern California. His most recent book, Hitler in Los Angeles: How Jews Foiled Nazi Plots Against Hollywood and America, upon which he will draw for today's keynote presentation, was named a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in History for 2018. Professor Ross's current book, The Secret War Against Hate: American Resistance to White Supremacy After 1945, traces the careers of 4 godfathers of post-war white supremacy and 3 New York-based Jewish agencies that spied on them and disrupted their plans for violence and death. May this year's keynote from Dr. Ross and our commemoration of the Holocaust illuminate the importance of never forgetting, and may it inspire us all to challenge injustices and organized threats to our communities today.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for coming today. Now, Yom HaShoah is generally meant to honor the memory of those who were killed in the Holocaust. But this year, I want to tell you a story about those who prevented a Holocaust of sorts from happening in Los Angeles. This is a story that many of you don't know, and it's an important story because it is relevant to our own times. It's a story about resistance to anti-Semitism, to hate, in a time when very few authorities cared at all. And my story, I'm going to start with a PowerPoint and give you some images to illustrate what we're talking about. My story is the story of Los Angeles, and it starts in the 1930s. And I just want to show you what Los Angeles looked like in the 30s and 40s. This is a map of Nazi and fascist LA. And you can see the downtown areas here. And everything in red is either a Nazi or fascist organization. And what I want to tell you is that, in fact, I could not fit all the Nazi and fascist organizations onto this map. Otherwise, all you would have seen would be red downtown. And this cover of a book, the talk of which today is coming from, Hitler in LA. But the important thing to point out is this image here at the top of the book is Hitler's birthday, 1935. And it is taken not in Germany, but as you can see from the American flag, it's on Figueroa and 15th Street. And imagine being a Jew walking through downtown Los Angeles in 1936 and seeing many stores proudly displaying the swastika flag. Well, the story I want to tell you today begins on July 26, 1933, when Nazis in Los Angeles held their first open meeting. They referred to themselves at that time as the Friends of New Germany, and they met at the Alt Heidelberg Inn, which was just outside of downtown LA. And at the end of the meeting, the Nazis asked the audience to come and join anyone who wanted to save America from the two great threats, communists and Jews. We welcome you to join. And afterwards, several dozen did join. And a reporter who was there that day asked the brown shirts to give a Hitler salute, and they did, as you can see here. And this was on the front page of local newspapers the next day. And people who looked at this picture probably either thought these were 5 thugs or 5 Keystone cops. They were closer to the former than the latter. And I have the article here in yellow, and it was, very much a reportage of what had happened, except for the very last paragraph, which says the Friends of New Germany wish to invite in any military veteran from World War I, whether they be German or American, who needs a place to stay, who needs food, who needs clothing, who needs comfort. The basement of the Alt Heidelberg Inn has been turned into housing for veterans, and we welcome you to come. The only thing you have to do is listen to the propaganda minister, Hans Winterhalter, tell you about the new Germany. The hero of my story is Leon Lewis, who was born to Jewish German emigre parents. He was born in the late 1880s in Wisconsin and went to George Washington University as an undergraduate, and then went to law school at the University of Chicago. And he graduated in 1913. But instead of going to work for a commercial law firm, Leon Lewis believed in the concept of tikkun olam, heal the world. And so he took a job with a brand new organization that had just started called the Anti-Defamation League. And he was named their first executive secretary. And his job was to monitor anti-Semitism across the United States. Well, 2 years later, in 1915, he was made the head of the ADL's committee working with the moguls in Hollywood. And his job was to watch films to make sure there weren't anti-Semitic images coming through. Well, when he read that little paragraph in the newspaper, the reason he knew that Hitler was trying to build an army is because he, in fact, had gone into World War I. He went in as a private and came out as a major. And he saw the destruction the war had brought. He was also gassed during the war. It affected his health. And when he went back to Chicago after the war, he told the 2 men who he was working with that things were going to get worse in Europe, and that, in fact, he could see that fascism and Nazism were going to come out of the ash heap of history of World War I. And so he suggested they create an international division. And for any of you who have ever worked in an organization, if you have a great idea to create a new committee, guess who runs that committee? You. So Leon Lewis was now asked to be not only the national secretary, but the international secretary, which meant there was nobody in America following Hitler's rise to power more carefully than Leon Lewis. Well, the next major move in the story comes in 1930 when he moves to LA for health reasons and opens up his own practice. But in January 1933, Adolf Hitler becomes Vice Chancellor of Germany, and Leon Lewis is very concerned. Now, many people have argued over the years that Jews should have done more to resist Hitler, that they simply were too passive in the face of his rise to power, and then once in power, too passive. And I would argue that's incorrect. In fact, Jews did resist Hitler. They just had a very divided strategy. The American Jewish Congress, led by Rabbi Stephen Wise, advocated a very aggressive approach to Hitler. They called for an international boycott of all German products until he stopped persecuting all minorities. Whereas the opposite side was the American Jewish Committee, led by Judge Proskauer, who argued that if you got in Hitler's face, he would just double down and make it worse for the Jews. And therefore, he suggested that, in fact, Jews contact religious leaders and work behind the scenes. Well, none of those things seemed to work. And in March 1933, Adolf Hitler sent out Captain Robert Pape, who had been Hitler's commanding officer in World War I, or one of his officers, to Los Angeles and asked him to organize Nazi strongholds all along the Pacific coast. And again, at this point, they were called the Friends of New Germany. And he was assisted in his efforts by Hermann Schwinn, who would soon replace him. The Nazis also opened up the Aryan bookstore downtown in LA, which you can see in this slide here. And then we had Hans Winterhalter, who is the Minister of Propaganda, and Paul Themlitz, who is the #2 man, and he also owned the Aryan bookstore. Well, Leon Lewis knew they were trying to raise an army. They were trying to raise an army, and he feared they could be successful. Why? Because in March 1933, when Franklin Roosevelt assumed the presidency, he and Congress said, the first thing we have to do is deal with a bankrupt economy. And they passed the Economy Act of 1933, which cut military benefits from a maximum of $100 a month to a maximum of $20 a month. And many veterans got nothing at all. Well, those veterans were furious. And LA was the largest center, LA and Southern California, of veterans in the country, over 150,000 of them living in Southern California. Also, German Americans were the largest ethnic group in the city, with over 100,000 German Americans in 1930, more than double any other ethnic group. So Leon Lewis thought, if the Nazis want to raise an army, I will help them, but not in the way they think. He knew that no German would ever listen to an American officer, and no American would ever listen to a German officer. And so what did he do? He went over to Patriotic Hall, which is just below the 10 freeway on Figueroa. And he was a member of the Disabled American Veterans and the American Legion. And he went to 4 men who were part of the Disabled American Veterans. And 2 of them were married. And he asked all 4, plus 2 of their wives, to go undercover and join every Nazi and fascist group in LA to try to rise to positions of leadership and then try to destroy those organizations from within. And his first recruit was Captain John Schmidt. He was the perfect, ideal person for the Friends of New Germany. Why? He was born in Germany. His father was a general in the Bavarian army. His brother was a high-ranking officer in the German army. And John had enlisted as a German military cadet at the age of 16, but then soon left and came to America, lied about his age, joined the American army, and fought with General Pershing in Mexico. And then when World War I broke out, at least American involvement in April 1917, he went to Europe and fought against his own family. But he hated Hitler. He felt Hitler had damaged everything Germany stood for, so he and his wife Alice both joined the Friends of New Germany and rose to positions of power. Likewise, Captain Carl Sunderland had spent most of his life in the cavalry, and he and his wife Blanche joined the Friends of New Germany. Both of them spoke, or at least understood, German, and which they never told the Friends of New Germany. And so oftentimes at luncheon meetings or dinners, they would say things in German that they didn't think either husband or wife knew, and they did. Third person was Major C. Bert Allen. And finally, his only Jewish spy, who he only used once, really, Colonel William Conley. And he used him for two reasons. A, Conley didn't look Jewish. He didn't have a Jewish name. But more importantly, Conley was the national commander of the disabled American veterans and been traveling the country since March 1933, denouncing Roosevelt and the administration for their awful acts against veterans. And so what Leon Lewis decided to do, he said, I'm a lawyer and I know what admissible evidence is. I want you men to get me admissible evidence of what the Nazis are planning to do. I will then turn that evidence over to authorities and they will take control. Well, over the next several weeks, the three of the first four men were going to have lunch virtually every day with the Friends of New Germany, with the leaders of that group. And during that time, they also met a man, Dietrich Gefgen. Gefgen had left Germany in the 1920s. He had been one of Hitler's original brown shirts, but he left after he shot a Jew to death and didn't want to take a chance of being arrested. He came to America, made his way across the country to San Francisco, where he worked as a chef in a restaurant. But while there, he joined the National Guard, the California National Guard. And during his time in the National Guard, he drew blueprints of the San Francisco Armory, where all the military weapons were kept, where the ammunition was kept, where the officers' quarters were, where the enlisted men were. He then went down to San Diego and worked with Nazis and fascists there to get the blueprint for the San Diego Armory. And after he did that, that's when he came to LA. And he asked Schmidt and his friends to get him blueprints of the LA Armory and machine guns. And when they asked him why they needed that, he told them that he had a grand plan. And on an appointed day, there would be Nazis, American fascists who were known as the Silver Shirts, and every German vessel that docked along the coasts, either East Coast or West Coast, had a small contingent of Gestapo troops on it. They would also have the Gestapo troops show up at the LA, San Francisco, San Diego armories at exactly the same moment. They would burst in with weapons. They would round up all the personnel, and they would ask them the following question: do you want to help us save America from the Jews and communists? Everyone who said yes would be welcomed into the German army. Everyone who said no would be murdered on the spot. Well, Leon Lewis knew this would be hearsay, and so he arranged this meeting to be held in a hotel room that he had rented, and he had put in a dictaphone machine, the early equivalent of tape recorders. So everything that was said in that meeting was on tape. At that point, he had enough evidence to go to the authorities. And the first person he went to was LA Police Chief Captain James Two Gun Davis. And as you can see in his favorite picture here that he liked to show to everyone, he was nicknamed Two Gun because for several years in a row, he had won the National Police Pistol Shooting Contest with both his left hand and his right hand. And just for you to know that it was Police Chief Davis who coined the term, shoot first, ask questions later. Well, Lewis went into the police chief's office, introduced himself, told him he had served in the war, he had done a little intelligence work, and in fact, he had a series of undercover agents who had found the following information. And before he could even talk about that, about 2 minutes into his talk, Davis stops him and says, "You don't get it. Hitler's only doing what he needs to do to save Germany from the Jews. And the real crisis in LA, the real threat, the real enemy are not those Nazis and fascists you're complaining about. It's all those communists in Boyle Heights." And the captain let him know, as far as he was concerned, every commie was a Jew and every Jew a commie. So Lewis left and went to the sheriff, Eugene Biscaluz. But the problem there is he saw a photograph in his office of the sheriff with George Gissling, the Nazi counsel from LA. And Biscaluz said the same thing, "There's nothing I can do," and threw him out of the office. Lewis then went to see the FBI. And while the local FBI was sympathetic, they said, "There's nothing we can do unless J. Edgar Hoover orders us." And Hoover, who was, in my estimation, a major anti-Semite, was obsessed with hunting down Reds and was not going to have any of his agents distracted by looking for Nazis and fascists, who, as far as he was concerned, posed very little danger. Well, at that point, Leon Lewis had a problem. He had basically given up his entire private practice to run this spy operation full time, figuring, okay, once I give this information to the authorities, I can go back to my practice. But no authority would help him. And so he kept running the spy operation, but by November 1933, he was virtually out of money. All his private clients had quit. He had spent his savings. He had a wife and 2 children, and he wrote a memo saying, "Unless I can get financial help, I'm going to have to shut down this operation, and God help us." Well, before he would shut it down, he went to 3 men. Irving Thalberg, the number 2 person at MGM, known as the boy genius. But Thalberg's real claim to fame for someone like Leon Lewis is he was known to be the most successful fundraiser for Jewish causes in Los Angeles. He also went to Rabbi Edgar Magnin, who was the rabbi of Wilshire Boulevard Temple, arguably the most important temple, not only in Los Angeles, but in the entire West Coast. And the most important of the 3 men, Mendel Silberberg, the man who invented entertainment law before there was such a thing. Silberberg was the most powerful entertainment attorney in the country at that point. If many of you probably remember the name Lou Wasserman, well, Mendel Silberberg was Lou Wasserman on steroids. He represented most of the studios. He represented personally most of the Jewish moguls, and he represented most of the Jewish movie stars. As someone who worked with him told me, when Mendel asked you to do something, you didn't say why, you just did it. Well, after Leon explained to Mendel what was going on, Mendel said, "Don't worry, I will get you the money." He proceeded to call 40 of his close friends, 40 of the most powerful men, and they were all men in Hollywood, and told them, "We want you to show up at the Hillcrest Country Club in March 1934 and tell no one about it." And that night, it was like a red carpet event without a red carpet. 40 people showed up. They were escorted into a private dining room. And when they entered that dining room, they all found copies of the Silver Legion magazine, which was the Silver Shirts periodical. And as they leafed through, they saw all these anti-Semitic images of Hollywood. And this second image, How a Star is Born, was turned into a sticker, and it was put on telephone poles and buildings throughout Los Angeles. And Lewis knew these men because he had been working with them since 1915. He knew they were hardscrabble men who weren't going to give him money just because he was a fellow Jew. And so he decided to frighten them into generosity. And he told them that most of you pay attention to your above-the-line personnel. That is, the names we see at the beginning of a movie, the stars, the editors, the producer, the director, the writer. But 80% of your employees are below the line. And my agents who are actually checking out what's going on in your studios have discovered that your foremen are firing virtually every blue-collar Jewish worker at your studios. But worse yet, My spies have uncovered hit lists that the Nazis have drawn up, and your names are on those lists. At the end of the meeting, he walked out with the equivalent of $400,000 in 2020 dollars and a pledge to keep that money going every year. And it's a good thing they did, because not only did they discover the Dietrich Gefgen plot, but they discovered plots to drive through Boyle Heights with machine guns, killing as many Jews as possible, to create phony fumigation companies that when they got a job for a Jewish house would pump in cyanide. They uncovered plots to blow up aircraft factories all through Southern California and LA in particular, LA being the largest manufacturer of airplanes before World War II. And finally, they uncovered plots to blow up military installations all along the Pacific coast. Well, this is what they did, and this is what Leon Lewis and his agents foiled. And I want to talk to you in the remaining time about two of those plots. Leon Lewis's most successful agent was a man named Chuck Slocum. Chuck Slocum was born in Oakland, raised in Long Beach, and sometime in the early 30s, he joined the Ku Klux Klan because he hated communists. But within a few weeks, he discovered that the Klansmen didn't just hate communists, they hated Jews, they hated Blacks, and they hated Catholics. And he didn't hate any of them. And he wound up going to Leon Lewis and volunteering to work for him undercover while he remained an officer in the Ku Klux Klan. And it's a good thing he did, because he uncovered two plots, two mass murder plots of Jewish leaders in LA. The first one was proposed by Ingram Hughes, a failed attorney who also worked as a linotype operator at the LA Times. And Ingram Hughes was one of the city's most prominent fascists. And in September 1935, he drew up what you can see here called a proclamation. And there's certainly too much text to read, but the key sentence is, "I call upon all true Christians, all true patriotic Christians, to join me in finding a solution to the Jewish problem that cannot be done by legal methods alone." Well, this proclamation was put in, he snuck into the LA Times on a late Saturday night where he still had friends, and they slipped in a copy of proclamation in every Sunday paper. And so imagine waking up on a Sunday morning, go into your home, you take your LA Times, you open it up, and out comes this single page basically calling for death to Jews. Well, in fact, there was a plot. Ingram Hughes recruited Chuck Slocum as his right-hand man and told them that the plot was going to be as follows. We are going to kidnap 20 of the most powerful Jewish leaders in LA, the main bankers, judges, financiers, and one Hollywood figure, Busby Berkeley, who I didn't know was Jewish until I was writing this book. And he said, what we're going to do is bring them out to a park outside of the city, a very isolated park. We're going to hang them from trees. And while they are dangling from the ropes, we're going to take machine guns and shoot their bodies full of so much lead that hopefully we can sever the trunk from the top. And then we're going to call newspapers and have the newspapers come out with photographers. They'll take pictures of those Jews dangling on the rope. They will be on newspapers the next day. And when Americans see that the most powerful Jews in LA can be murdered, they will rise up en masse and have bloodbaths throughout America. Well, Leon Lewis didn't want to take a chance. What if this man was able to actually carry out his plan? Could you really take that chance? So he had Slocum convince Hughes to postpone it. Why? The Nazis had known almost since the beginning that Leon Lewis was spying on them. How did they know? Because the head of the police Red Squad, Red Hines, was trading information with the Friends of New Germany leaders. He would give them a piece of information about what the Jews were doing. They would give him a piece of information about what they had uncovered about communists. Police chief, or rather, Captain Hines never gave them the names of any of the agents, but the Nazis and fascists stationed a man outside Leon Lewis's building, the Roosevelt building on West 6th Street, downtown, during the daytime to see if anyone they knew walked into that building. And if anyone they knew walked in, that would be the spy. Well, Slocum said to Hughes, we know there's a spy. And if that spy tells the police before we've done this or afterwards, we're going to be arrested. And if it happens afterwards, we're going to spend the rest of our life in prison. So let's postpone this until we figure out who the spy is. Well, Hughes agreed to postpone it. They never figured out who the spy was, and the plot never happened. But 2 years later, a more dangerous and, in fact, a more likely death plot was concocted by British Captain Leopold McLaughlin. Leopold McLaughlin, who you can see seated on your far left, is somewhere between 6'6" and 6'8". He fought for the British in the Boer War. He was a captain during World War I. He has written 4 books on how to kill in hand-to-hand combat. But on top of all that, he was the world's jiu-jitsu champion. And before he came to LA, he had been touring the world, both with jiu-jitsu matches, but also teaching jiu-jitsu to many of the police agencies throughout the world. He did it at Scotland Yard. He went to Paris to do it to the French Sûreté, and now is back in Los Angeles. And during a German Day celebration in the fall of 1937, he ran into Chuck Slocum and some of his fascist and Klan friends at what was then known as Hindenburg Park, today La Crescenta Park, 17 miles northeast of downtown. And the men quickly found a mutual admiration as anti-Semites. And McLaughlin proposed a solution that would rid the country of the Jewish problem. And what he proposed was they would bring together teams of men comprised of, at that point, the Nazis now call themselves the German-American Bund. There would be several members of the Bund, several members of the Silver Shirts, and several white Russians who had come to LA, the people who brought you the pogroms in Russia and Poland. And again, on the appointed day, they would place bombs at the homes of 24 major Hollywood figures, 22 of whom would be Jews, all the studio heads, Louis B. Mayer, the Warner Brothers, Columbia Studios, Paramount, all the studio heads would be bombed. Their homes would be destroyed. And any Jews who tried to escape town, they had boats in the harbor that those fast boats would take them down, and they had dynamite to throw into those boats. There were 2 Christian movie stars that he had targeted along with the 22, the most famous of which was Charlie Chaplin. And McLaughlin told his comrades that after we have blown up the homes, once again, we will let reporters know. They will take pictures of it. It'll be on the front page of the news throughout America. And the next day, once again, determined Christians will rise up and murder Jews and save America. Well, once again, the plot got too convoluted because you had men who were willing to die for the cause. Fascist Henry Allen, who kept in his car what he called his kite killer, which was, if you can see here, it's a plastic handle with a piece of wood that he proposed that you would shove it into the stomach of the Jew. And when he bent over, you would keep hitting him on the skull until he heard the skull crack. This is where the plotting was going on. This is not Nazi Germany, but this is La Crescenta Park in 1937. Well, Leon Lewis knew about the plot, and he called the DA to warn him. But before he called the DA, he told Chuck Slocum, you've got to convince Henry Allen and one other companion from the Silver Shirts that, in fact, McLaughlin is double-crossing you, that the murders are going to happen, and then McLaughlin's going to go to the DA, turn in state's evidence. The 3 of you are going to be killed, hung, gassed, put in jail for the rest of your life, and McLaughlin will go free. Let's anticipate it, go to the DA, let the DA take your depositions, and let's arrest McLaughlin. Leon Lewis never told the DA about the murder plot because he also knew that the sheriff and police officers were involved. And instead, he talked to the police and sheriff, basically saying, I'm not going to expose the corruption in your department, but the next time I tell you there's a plot against the Jews, I expect your cooperation. Well, McLaughlin was brought to trial for extortion because at the same time he was trying to bribe a millionaire in Santa Barbara. And he was convicted of extortion. The judge sentenced him to 5 years in prison, but said, I will suspend the sentence if you take the next boat out of town. Well, sitting in the back of the courtroom was one of his 6 estranged brothers, Victor McLaughlin, the Oscar winner. All the other brothers thought that their brother was crazy, which he was, and he rushed out after the verdict, bought his brother a one-way ticket to Liverpool, and he was never seen in America again. Well, the culminating moment in the story comes on December the 8th. What was December the 8th? Well, December the 7th, as we all know, was Pearl Harbor. Well, the morning of December 8th, the Justice Department sent out a memo to every city with the names of Nazis and fascists that need to be rounded up and arrested. And at the top of the LA list was Hermann Schwinn, the head of the German-American Bund in LA and one of the 4 German leaders nationally, and he was the chief Nazi for the entire Pacific coast. Well, when you read through the FBI reports, you can go online to the FBI website and you can see on the website who's arrested at what hour and what day. And it is an extraordinarily impressive document. Within 24, 48 hours, the FBI, along with the LAPD, had arrested virtually every single person on that list. Except I asked myself one question. Leon Lewis had repeatedly asked the FBI to put Hermann Schwinn under surveillance. J. Edgar Hoover wrote them back and said, Hermann Schwinn has broke no law, therefore he cannot be put under surveillance. But it's ironic that many of the movie stars, Jewish movie stars in Hollywood, who had broken no law, were put under surveillance by the Bureau, but not the Nazis. I had also written the government for Freedom of Information Act file on Hermann Schwinn. And when I finally got it, the file began in January 1942. Well, if the FBI only opened up a file in 1942, how did they know who to arrest? Well, I took a look at that list, and that list was broken into A, B, and C with the notation, arrest A immediately, then go after B, then go after C. And those names look awfully familiar to me. And I realized that starting in September 1939, Leon Lewis and his assistant, Joe Roos, were sending the FBI, Army intelligence, and Navy intelligence a list of all the dangerous Nazis and fascists in LA. And they broke them into 3 categories: highly dangerous, dangerous, keep under surveillance. Well, I went to Washington, went to the National Archives, and I found the memo Lewis had sent. And what I discovered when I compared it to the FBI record, the FBI had simply typed Leon Lewis's list instead of A, B, and C, highly dangerous, dangerous, keep under surveillance. They called it Group A, Group B, Group C. In short, Leon Lewis and Joe Roos were responsible for the rapid arrest of all the Nazis and fascists in LA. Did they ever get credit? No, but they didn't care. All they cared was protecting Jews from harm. And in fact, Leon Lewis would eventually die in the 1950s, early 50s, while driving along Pacific Coast Highway and suffering a heart attack. He would die unknown to everyone except a few close friends. The only award he ever received was an Americanism Award from the American Legion in June 1939. And through his valiant efforts, what Leon Lewis, what Joe Roos, And what their undercover agents showed is that without ever picking up a gun, without ever using any kind of weapon, they defeated Nazis and fascists in Los Angeles, determined to murder Jews. And even though virtually every one of Leon Lewis's spies was a Christian, they never felt like they were working for the Jews. They felt they were working for America because they believed that in our country, when one group calls for death to another group because of their race, their religion, their ethnicity, or politics, they believed it was the job of every true American patriot to stand up and protect those people from harm, even if it meant risking their own lives. And as we pay tribute on Yom HaShoah to the memory of those killed in the Holocaust, I think we also want to pay tribute to the memory of those who prevented deaths in Los Angeles, who stood up to the Nazi and fascist threat, risking their own lives to save fellow Americans. Thank you.
We will now engage in the traditional candle lighting ceremony. We light 6 candles to represent the 6 million Jews who were murdered in the Holocaust. The book of Proverbs tells us that a candle is comparable to a person's soul, always reaching up for transcendence while being tethered to this physical world, but reminding us that there is more to each person than the wick alone. Each person is holy, and our rabbi said that anyone who ends a life has ended an entire world, but anyone who saves a life saves an entire world.
מלא רחמים, שוכן במרומים, המצא מנוחה נכונה על כנפי השכינה. במעלות קדושים וטהורים וגיבורים כזוהר הרקיע מאירים ומזהירים לנשמות 6 המיליונים אחינו ואחיותינו רבבות רבבות בני ישראל אנשים נשים וטף שנהרגו שנשחטו שנשרפו שנחנקו שנטבעו ושנקברו חיים בידי הנאצים ועוזיהם יימח שמם ומסרו נפשם על קידוש השם בעבור שאנו מתפללים לעילוי נשמותיהם. לכן בעל הרחמים יסתירם בסתר כנפיו לעולמים ויצרור החיים את נשמותיהם. לכן בעל הרחמים יסתירם בסתר כנפיו לעולמים ויצרור בצרור החיים את נשמותיהם בגן עדן תהי מנוחתם. אדוני הוא נחלתם וינוחו בשלום על משכבם ונאמר
We will now recite the Mourner's Kaddish. It's customary to say this prayer standing up if you're able to, and you can recite it along with me if you'd like. Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei Rabbah B'alma divrach chirutei v'yamlich malchutei b'chayei uv'yomei chon uv'chayei dechol beit Yisrael b'agala v'zman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mivarach le'olam u'lomei almaya yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitparar v'yitromam v'yitnasei v'yithadar v'yitale v'yithalal shemei dekudesha brichu le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata damiran be'alama v'imru amen. Yehei shlama Rabbah min Shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Osei shalom v'imromav hu yasei shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen.